So thanks for hanging out with me today. So I'm going to be talking about the UX Designer Survival Guide. So for the agenda, I'll have an introduction, a little bit more of who I am. We'll go through the actual survival guide and the different tips, have a compass, get the lay of the land, know your tools, manage outside influences, hack a Swiss Army knife, and we'll go through takeaways and have a little Q&A session. All right, so the introduction. Who am I? So I am the UX architect for Media Temple. If you're not familiar with Media Temple, we are a web and cloud solutions company based out in Los Angeles. I am a recent LA transplant, originally from the East Coast, born and raised in Boston, lived in New York for about 12 years, so it's lovely being back. So a little bit more about where I really started with design and usability. I started really falling in love with what user experience was at Apple Fifth Avenue, working at the Cube. Then I decided to pursue a career looking for opportunities as an interaction designer for a small startup at ASD Labs. Then transitioned over to American Express Publishing, working with Food and Wine Magazine, Travel and Leisure, and Departures on their websites. Then became the UX designer for The Knot, which is part of the EXO group. Then, yeah, for today, I'm the UX designer for Media Temple, and it's been an awesome ride. Just being able to learn about the different industries and the different habits of our users. So let's start taking a look at what this survival guide really is. So having a compass. What do I really mean about this? What does it mean to have a compass? We're going to be taking a look at a checklist that I have and the project brief and the value it's brought to me and the different projects that I've gotten to work on. So let's take consideration in this type of scenario where, let's say you're starting off on the project, but stakeholders disagree on what the problem is, there's a lack of documentation, everyone's on a totally different page. So what I like to start out with is having a set of key questions for really understanding. So these key questions are the following. What problem are you solving? For whom? How do you know that it's the problem? And what's the next step to solve it? This particular checklist for myself has been able to allow me to identify the problem, provide some kind of framework around the actual solution, and then understanding the stakeholder's point of view, because every stakeholder is going to have their own understanding of what the problem is. It may have different interpretations of what data they have access to. So it's great to be able to ask them, okay, what is the problem? How do you know this is the problem? To help evaluate what is actually the problem that we're here to solve. And then it's also allowed me to help evaluate the data. So let's take a look at the project brief, which really helps with the focus. So definitely it's allowed me and the teams to help collect the key objectives, identify the different phases of a solution, and then identifying the teams and the individuals involved allows for everyone just to get on the same page, and it also acts as a source of truth. So again, a lot of people have different understandings and interpretations of what the problem is, what the possible solutions are. Having a project brief allows everyone to just be able to not only comment on this type of document if it's all in one place, but it's also a great location just to gather all people's understanding around this particular problem, a particular project, and then it's an understanding of what solution we're working towards. So specific tools that I use, I love using Google Docs just for its autosave and its versioning abilities, as well as the ability to allow different parties to comment on different sections. There's also that same capability with Microsoft Word for those people that are more comfortable with working in the Microsoft software world. Definitely Word allows for versioning and tracking changes, as well as commenting. And then using Confluence. If you're not familiar with Confluence, it is a collaboration software, mostly common within corporate environments. It will allow you to create different wiki pages and allows you to create other types of documents around a particular project. Allows for commenting and tracking different tickets if you're using Jira, which is a ticket system. So that was having a compass, which is basically around having some type of documentation using the project brief, for instance, or your checklist, just to get everyone focused around the problem that you're actually there to solve. So let's take a look at get the lay of the land. What do I mean by this? Let's take a look at this scenario. So let's say you're starting new at a company, or your team members are totally new. Everyone has a different workflow. They have different needs. Perhaps they've worked with UX differently. It's important to understand a little bit more as to the way that they actually work. So definitely want to go out there and learn how your team works. Understand what your deliverables are at the beginning of a project. Provide annotated wireframes and interactive prototypes. The more information, the better that they'll be prepared when it comes to building out the solution. And then the whole interaction with your team and understanding the way that they work allows for a particular exchange of information, and it also improves your personal workflow. Then it's also setting up the team for success and building trust. So you're establishing that relationship with your teammates. Specific tools that I like to use, Envision, since it allows me to work with product managers as well as my teammates to comment on certain wireframes and prototypes. Also, recently, I've been working with OmniGraffle and sharing that with our copywriter so that I'll have the actual content that's going to be plugged in to the different pages and the different workflows that I'm designing for. So it's definitely improved with the collaboration process. And then we have Adobe XD and then Framer, which are two great tools for designing and building out prototypes. So that was getting the lay of the land. Let's take a look at know your tools. So let's consider this particular scenario. So there's a little bit of frustration when it comes to actually setting up your environment. You may have totally new software. Maybe you're not too familiar with the different grid layouts that your website might be using. Maybe there are certain UI patterns, but there's no pattern library. So you're going back and forth trying to get an idea as to what the designs actually are, what you can actually pull from. Let's say you're spending too much time exporting new files and just doing the drag and drop too many times just to update your prototype for your team. So to save time with your tools, definitely look at creating templates. And these templates can include existing UI patterns and have a custom grid that your team may be using or that your site may be using. Look at creating keyboard shortcuts. So certain programs that I may be using when it comes to Adobe Creative Suite, that I have OmniGraffle, and then even Sketch, they all have slightly different keyboard types of shortcuts. What I like to do is actually go into the system keyboard preferences and updating those keyboard shortcuts for those programs so that they're all similar and I'm not constantly having to spend time remembering what those shortcuts are. Also, this allowance of creating these templates allows you to spend more time just focusing on the V1 of the solution, and just so they can go ahead and start testing it. Now, I know in the past for myself, I've spent too much time on setting up my environment that I'm rethinking the problem and just coming up with different types of solutions, but not really having the time to test it out. If I was just working from templates and had my environment set up already, I could just focus on translating my wireframes, my sketches, into something a bit more refined and ready for testing. Also, definitely think about reducing the steps to building your prototype. So previously I mentioned the idea of spending too much time having to export all these new files and then drag and drop these files to your actual updated prototype. There's some time that can actually be cut down if you can look at using different tools that can automate that process for you. So a couple of the tools that I've used to help automate certain drag and drop workflows, they actually include InVision Sync, which is a plugin that is available for InVision. And it does allow me to go ahead and update my files in OmniGraffle, and then anything I update on one file, on one folder on my desktop, it will be updated automatically to the web on InVision and to my phone. And the same idea is accomplished with using Sketch, Gulp.js, and then Framer. So Gulp.js is basically a task runner that's written in JavaScript. So yes, there's a little bit of coding involved, but definitely there are tons of resources that can help you write those particular JavaScript tasks so they will communicate to your Sketch and your Framer.js prototype, so that essentially anything you export out of Sketch will automatically be updated to your web prototype that you've built in Framer.js. So that's know your tools. Let's take a look at the next tip. So manage outside influences. So essentially using proto-personas and user testing. So let's consider this particular scenario where there are tons of assumptions on who your user is. Maybe there's not enough time to actually flesh out a full persona. There's not enough time for conducting user interviews or mapping out the actual customer journey. Or perhaps there's no budget available for the proper user testing. So definitely this is where proto-personas can come in. So if you're familiar with Lean UX by Jeff Godeth, he mentions the value of a proto-persona, which is essentially a rough sketch of who your user is. Definitely it provides a focus on the different pain points that this particular user may have. And then definitely, yes, it's built on assumptions on who your user is. But throughout the process, as you're going through the iteration and observing what your users are actually doing, those assumptions are tested and then evaluated. And then you can eventually come to actually start fleshing out what your persona, what your actual user is doing. So I have a couple of examples here where these particular personas are rough sketches, and then eventually it leads to Nita Singh, who was one of a previous project's persona, and more fleshed out ideas to who she is and what her pain points are. And then there's always time for user testing. You want to identify the individuals who interact with your user. So if you have customer service agents or sales agents accessible, definitely ask them, what are our users doing? Get a better idea as to what you're building for the user. Will it be valuable for them? These particular individuals can definitely give you a better idea as to what our users are and what they're doing and what their pain points are. And then there's get out the office. Now, thankfully, I've worked in different locations that down the street, there's a coffee shop or a local diner. And yes, it might be a little weird just tapping someone's shoulder and asking them to take a look at a particular design and getting their feedback, but you'd be surprised. People are actually open to just taking a little look as to something that you've actually worked out, and they're definitely thankful if you can actually pay for a coffee of theirs just for their time that they spent. And then there's exploring the remote user testing options. So I'm a big fan of usertesting.com, and there's also UserZoom. And basically these tools allow for a recorded session to happen where any of your designs that you've made, you can place those designs on that platform, and have actual users go through the designs, and you get to hear them think out loud and give opinions as to what the design is actually doing. Now I'm about to share with you a quick video clip as to what a user session, a typical user session is when using one of these tools. Let's see. Hopefully you'll hear the sound.
Here's the site open. It says Ticketmaster. Got categories: music, sports, arts, theater, family. Ticket deals. I've got like this little banner ad right here. Not really ad, just banner, kind of scrolling through different things. It looks like these are different events that I could get tickets for. It says My Ticketmaster, hello, update your list of favorites and never miss an event. Some hot tickets and just announced. It looks like hot tickets. I'm on the, actually, I think I'm on the just announced tab, and I can't tell actually if I'm in the hot tickets or just announced tab, but either way, those are two tabs, and I see upcoming events listed.
So in this example, you were able to hear what the actual user is seeing, what they're expecting as they go through this particular design, and what actually didn't make sense to them. So definitely using remote testing tools saves some time if you can't actually sit with the user and get those particular responses with them during that session. So that was manage outside influences. So we have ourselves in a more user-centric kind of idea or mindset when we're actually developing our solution. So let's take a look at the next tip, which is pack a Swiss Army knife. So what do I really mean about the Swiss Army knife? It's really about looking at the versatility of the sketch. So let's take a look at this scenario where, let's say, all right, everyone's on the same page, but there's always that one person that may not totally understand. Maybe the concept is too complex. The project brief wasn't totally enough. So solution to that? All right, now you just want to get out of your head and look at sketching as a great solution to communicate the idea visually. It allows you to understand the actual workflow and the concepts. And this is something that it's not just you, but your stakeholders and other people involved on the project can start looking at together. It also allows for getting ideas out with just creating thumbnail sketches. Now, sketches are also great for paper prototypes, and they're great for testing or creating usability tests to make sure that these workflows actually make sense to our user. I always stay prepared with some pen or Sharpie or pencil and my notebook. I'm always there with every meeting, sketching away. So these are a couple of examples, some from my actual notebook. And then there are tons of different templates that are out there. If you're familiar with doodlers, they are actually different types of templates that are of different iOS devices, as well as Android devices, and they're already preset. All you have to do is dive in and start laying out the actual design. And what I've also noticed is there's always someone with a red pen ready to dive in on a sketch. People are usually hesitant when it's a final design. So with sketches, people are more comfortable with just going in and making comments, maybe adding their own notes to a particular paper sketch that you've created. So let's take a look at a couple of takeaways. So have a way to frame the problem and keep everyone involved focused. Learn what your team needs so everyone can be successful in building out that solution. Save yourself some time by knowing your tools, using templates, updating your shortcuts, or then looking at automation for your workflow. Stay user-centric, even if time is limited, by using PROTO-PERSONAS or remote user testing software. then always use sketching to talk through the problems and to validate your solution. If all goes well, high fives everywhere. We're winning.